Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Mike Force podcast. It is, of course, me. You're seeing me on YouTube or you're hearing my voice. It's Mike. Got the backdrop of the new Mike Force studio and got the old, it's on this side, the new Defiance sign, which stands for We Defy. Now, I wanted to do a podcast and catching up with all of the things that have been happening over the last couple weeks, but also talk about some things that are coming up in the near future and give you best tactics for how to survive a gunfight in self-defense. So if you haven't seen the YouTube video I made on I'm Not a Domestic Terrorist, go check that out. It's on YouTube on the Fieldcraft Survival channel. Here's how it unfolded. Project Veritas, which does this often, they against government corruption and even ignorance, they do these behind-the-scenes whistleblower facilitations where they'll get information out there about some of the things that are happening behind the scenes of the government that are destroying our country. This corruption, this high level of corruption, and these gross tactics are literally destroying our country. One of the documents released by them was a militia violent extremist document which outlined a whole bunch of indications of domestic terrorist threats to this country, the national security of this country. That included Punisher skulls. That included my organization, American Contingency. So just a little bit of background. I started American Contingency during the BLM Antifa stuff, where I wanted to create a community-based group and organization that would help each other, whether that was lifting each other up morally because they were morally hit, whether it was a natural disaster or a man-made disaster in the case of protesters that were peacefully protesting turn into violent protesters that were committing acts of violence against innocent law-abiding citizens. So that group is a forum-based group. We started out on locals. And then when I started that group, we did have extremists, people who came on board, wanted to talk and communicate about burning the system down, right? They wanted to commit acts of violence. In fact, one particular person decided to take the business card of a special agent who belonged to the FBI and post it on my forum, on Locals. Like, Locals is the name of the application that we hosted on, but we had 100,000 people on Locals. And this person took a picture of a special agent's business card and talked about shooting up government buildings. So, one, we had an obligation to report that to the agent who had his information compromised, and two, report it to local authorities, which we did. I mean, I can't imagine any other course of action in being negligent and just pretending that doesn't exist or that didn't happen. I do not want anybody's blood on my hands. I don't want somebody to threaten something and then not act on that threat, or not act on that threat in reporting the information and have somebody hurt, potentially killed. So we did do that. I mean, I hope every ethical person on this planet would do that. But that got me to a position last week where now I'm considered a bootlicker. So in 1 week, the government calls me a militia violent extremist organization. In their words, an organization that people could use, extremists could use as a banner to the leftist calling me a right-wing extremist and the far right calling me a bootlicker. So, I mean, it's very complicated and confusing if you allow it to be. What I've realized is probably this is what it feels like to stand up for the center of the country, the moderates, the libertarians, whatever you want to label us, you can label us that. How about people who just don't want to deal with fringe actors, because these people are acting, versus living a great life here in America, taking advantage of freedoms and following law and order. I even this morning was shown a whole bunch of posts and threads that were made about me, about this idea that I use my past experience as the context for what I do today. I certainly don't do that because I'm doing things every single day as a company, not me individually, but as a company to better my community and the society in which I live, which I fought for, by the way. I mean, yeah, the bro vet days are over, but I never consider myself a bro vet. What I consider myself is a veteran, which I never stood on the platform and said, support me because I'm a veteran. I said, support me because I have experience that's unique in making you better prepared. But some people hate that. Some people hate that. In fact, right now, my lawyer is working up paperwork because we're going to go after a couple former employees who were fired because they were unethical. Like literally the things they did, if advertised, would destroy their careers in the industry and space and also their personal lives. I have all that evidence. But it's not in my best interest to virtue signal to the world and make threats that I'm not willing to follow through with. But I will get a lawyer. Just like I lawyered up to inquire if what the FBI did was legal, because I don't think it is. I mean, one, it's defamation, but two, it actually, as part of the Privacy Act, is illegal. But that will be reviewed by lawyers and hopefully put into the legal system and litigation to allow us to have a stance and change things that are going on in, I believe, a corrupt government. Look, I don't think there's a conspiracy in corruption. I just think people suck. Just like the few employees that I fired because of their neglect, their inability to do their job, and the irrational, illogical, and unethical things they literally did, I fired them because, and they want to virtue signal that's not the reason. Well, I will handle all of that in court because I'm a law-abiding citizen. I won't handle it by being unprofessional and talking crap, because that gets us nowhere. The fact that people have slid into my DMs and threatened my life, calling me a bootlicker, and the people who threatened my life, I reported them because I'm not interested in going to war with a bunch of children. I mean, I've been to war. This isn't the game I'm playing. I see people in special operations. I see people jumping on the bandwagon. And you know what's not happening? I'm not being affected by any of that. Neither are my employees. We had a business meet this morning. It's like, what's the status of the business? Nothing's changed. Things are actually getting better and going up. Because if you live in an echo chamber, it feels like you're getting growth from that experience. But the reality is it's making you more toxic, more vile, and more likely not to grow. In my echo chamber, which isn't an echo chamber because I have different thoughts, different ideas, positive, rational people who are law-abiding, we are progressing. Our company's scaling and growing, and we're affecting people in a positive way. One of the things that we decided to do is family preparedness on a larger scale. We're going to run Fieldcraft Survival Kids programs in 2023. Family preparedness has always been on our mind. It's something that we've routinely done, but now we're doubling down on training kids because children are our future. And if you haven't realized it, you can go into social media posts and accounts and see all the toxic behavior where these people are really competing against themselves, not me. But what's happening is that's becoming the new norm. I don't want it to be my norm. I don't want it to be in my children's norm, nor the community that we're building, because that's what we don't want. We don't want fringe actors, crap talkers, and all this toxic behavior. We just want to wake up, do our job, and live a good life. Like, ultimately, that's what we all want. So that's what we're going to do. One of the things that happened with the FBI is they came out through this document that was released. It was leaked. And they showed how incompetent they are as a government entity. What we have to understand is 5+ million people, that's subcontractors and employees, that work for mostly the Department of Defense, the Army, the Navy, civilians, and so many more that are part of the fabric of this country. The federal government is the biggest employer in the U.S., period. I mean, the federal government is the biggest employer of people in the entire United States. So are they the enemy, or are they incompetent because people just are like that? Look, like somebody had mentioned, one of my former employees that I fired because he was utterly the worst human being that ever existed, and we caught him on camera doing some unethical things. I have that evidence. I'm waiting for it because I'll release it in court if I have to. What I realized in the vile behavior that is people and in firing and letting go employees is that this is part of the human condition. This is part of the human problem that we're all faced with. People, especially now, who feel self-entitled because they have access to a platform on social media, act reckless. They do stupid things. Look, I'm not immune to that. I've done stupid things myself, but I'm willing to own up to it and look for ways to be more positive. You won't catch me sliding into people's DMs like these former employees and attacking them. That's what lawyers are for in my world. So what I want to get back to is the grassroots of what made us great, where we physically built relationships. We meet in person. We just had a Go Rigs and coffee with Mike Hernandez and Ricky and the team. And man, what a positive experience. Most people are not doing things like this because they get more spikes in analytics, more revenue through those spikes in analytics by being emotional, by being reckless, and being dumb. While other people like us and Fieldcraft are just growing, and growing. If you have people who don't like you and they come out and attack you, just some life advice, ignore them, because they want your energy. They want you to react to them. They want the attention. It's like somebody complaining about you in small circles. Why are they doing that? They want the affirmation that the things they feel in their system, in their body, in their soul are their reality. It's like if you have employees and employees talk bad about the company and you let them go and they go, why would you let me go? Well, because you talk poorly about the company. Well, I shouldn't get let go for that. You have a job with a company, and one of the moral obligations of working for that company is that you don't intentionally try to hurt that company. That can be taken into the government model, and that's what you get that's perceived as conspiracies or corruption. People are just dumb. Somebody called me a bootlegger and said, you're a bootlegger and you love the government, you're reporting everybody and it's a spy and all this stuff. No, that's not what we do. I don't know what else to say besides no. I don't even know why you would think or consider that that's us or what we do. But let me give you some evidence of my past. In 2012 into 2013, I deployed to Benghazi, Libya, to Tripoli, Libya, because of Benghazi. September 11th of 2012, where the ambassador to Libya of the United States, Ambassador Stevens, was killed along with 3 other government employees, including 2 members of the Global Response Staff Office, which I worked for. So when that happened, everything became political. Everything became political. We couldn't do a combat operation. We couldn't target the guys that were responsible. And you know what I did? I flipped tables on lieutenant colonels. I got out of the military and I went on Fox News, cloaked and daggered out, to whistleblow on the incompetence and unethical behavior of politicians, not government officials, but politicians who are government officials who weren't willing to do the right thing. Like go after the men responsible, the terrorist, called the men, they're not even men, the terrorists responsible for killing Americans overseas. And I whistleblew on them. Then I did another piece with Fox News where I wasn't in darkness. In fact, the first year working with my company, Fieldcraft Survival, I did that because I wanted to hold people accountable. So this is before I virtue signaled on social media of the things that we were doing. This is before it was a popular thing to boast about what you did. I did that. So if I'm a bootlicker, would I compromise my entire government contracting and military experience by whistleblowing in the dark and in the light of the irresponsible behavior of government officials? The answer obviously is no. So this idea that I'm a bootlicker, I know I'm not. This idea that I'm beholden to anybody, I know I'm not. The idea that Fieldcraft Survival is immoral and unethical, if I laid out the case of former employees and their behavior for you, it would make you dry heave. It would make you dry heave. It would make you dry heave. So what's the best tactic here? It's moving forward, because I'm pioneering a space. I have a mission. I have a purpose. You know what these guys' mission and purpose is? Self-destruction. That's what it is. And I'm tired of hearing about it. Like, we have no time for negative, toxic behavior. Those people in those homes, their homes, know what they're doing, and they're going to live with that for the rest of their life. You know who's not affected? Mike Glover, all the employees for Fieldcraft Survival and Fieldcraft Survival. The community that we've built from scratch, from hard work and ethical behavior. One of the things that we're rolling out, that we plan to roll out for next year, and this idea of family preparedness and kids, is highlighted in the conversation that I did with Leah, which will be Leah Stumpf, Andy Stumpf's fiance, who is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt who teaches full-time, who's going to help us come up with a summer camp program for children and getting families better prepared. That includes women and children and the entire family unit together. Because I think the key to repairing the country is the family unit. I think that's the key. Because when you take the family unit and you look at the breakdown and where we are currently, one of the reasons we are here with the spikes in crime and violence, all the unethical behavior, even the toxic behavior of the kids who hover in my DMs and they say they're going to come and kill me and my family in our sleep. Man, what world do you live in where somebody who doesn't know you is willing to do that? It's because of this breakdown. Where were their fathers? Where were their families? Where was the love? There's not a lot of love. We need to repair the family unit and give the family unit an opportunity to thrive. And that's the plan. Starting with summer camps, starting with family preparedness programs, and then introducing 3 new experience-based courses to include civilian survival school, foreign travel course, and our course, which we do right now, which is called Breakout. The idea for a foreign travel course would be based on my experience in international travel, working with the CIA, also working with the State Department, and my personal travel in the military. We're going to give you a course on best practices of how to survive peacetime detention. What do you do when you get rolled up into secondary in a foreign country? If you didn't know it already, you should understand that every manifest, including the passport information, the background information that's open source, and even private searches on you, and if you're a potential threat to a foreign country, are being done prior to your arrival. So the capacity and capability of that particular country will determine what that looks like. Is it going to be surveillance? Is it going to be putting you into secondary when you come through the checkpoint and interrogating you? That's happened to me in personal travel with the State Department. It's scary. And if you're not trained on what to do, you might be putting yourself in a bad situation. Also, what are the foreign international travel security situations? Like, what do I need to think about in a land where I don't have my everyday carry, where I don't have all the tools that I'm used to having for self-protection, where I don't maybe understand the laws and regulations of said foreign country? That is going to be me, Sean Kirkwood, and Kevin Owens running that kind of training. Sean Kirkwood ran the lab section, the interrogation section of CRC, which is our survival school and special operations for aviators who are potentially shot down behind enemy lines and special operations personnel who are operating behind enemy lines. Also, we're going to bring you civilian survival school. Kevin Estella is going to be heading up bushcraft and the survival aspects. We have land navigation, evading, and what it looks like when you're in a foreign country or a bad situation, a natural disaster or a man-made disaster where you have to bug out and displace. And also some components of the culmination of a scenario. Hey, you have 72 hours that you have to survive, and you have one Ziploc bag, which is all the contents you could put on your person. How are you going to survive? One of the best courses I went to was a government contracting survival school that supported personnel, which is civilians mainly, who are overseas and the country they're in falls apart. How do they get out? How do they break contact? That's going to be super important to know in the future for travel and for domestic fallout. I mean, what do we think the country's going to do in the next 3 years? It's not going to get better, guys. All I've seen in my history on social media since I started this company 6 or 7 years ago, and all the toxic behavior I have witnessed, even from my own peers in special operations, is disgusting. It makes my stomach churn. But again, I can't focus the energy there when the focus needs to be moving forward in a positive direction. Finally, you guys know about our breakout course. If you don't, we have one that we're running in September, one potentially in December as well, which will be a winter version of this. And think of this as the culmination experience. What happens when you're in a scenario where everything's gone to hell in a handbasket and it's the apocalypse? But a realistic version of that, not the zombie apocalypse, but what do you do if you're in Ukraine and you're a citizen and you're getting invaded by another country? The Red Dawn scenario. Is that a possibility in our country? Based on what I'm seeing and witnessing, which is historical, unprecedented actions by other countries, including foreign powers, if China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran decided to pull all of their resources together, they literally could take over this country. And the only resistance they would meet is the law-abiding citizen and the arms that they have. A lot of people talk about this concept of going to war with the government. I don't agree. I think it's disgusting, but it's not even realistic. What are you fighting? What are you fighting? Are you fighting a politician? Are you fighting? Realize that half the politicians that are in the government represent you. If you're on one side of the party aisle, whether it's a Republican or Democrat, half of the country, federal government, is aligned with your beliefs. So the other half, who are a bunch of old, crusty white dudes, do they represent you? And if they don't, are you going to go to war with them? Because we live in a sovereign nation where, luckily for us, we are decentralized in the breakdown of how we are governed in the first place. The federal government doesn't govern you in your city, in your town. When you wake up, the federal government has little to do with your actual life. But if you go on social media, it feels like they're consuming your life. If you put the phone down and you turn it off, are they consuming your life? I would think the answer would be no. So going to war is not viable. In the whole bootlicking thing, somebody said, oh, you guys are just in it for the money. We run a business called Fieldcraft Survival where we teach civilians. Despite it being for profit, there's not a lot of margins in training. All of my tactical partners would agree. But let me tell you something about training civilians. We were one of the first companies to train civilians. Even when we were getting attacked, we were out there training citizens of this country, even when we were getting attacked. Despite getting attacked on multiple fronts, we were still doing that. And it's comical to me to see people going after us when from the beginning we were fighting to train civilians. Last year, we trained 10,000 citizens of this country. This year, it'll be more than that. So, again, train civilians, prepare for the worst case scenario, and remember that the culmination exercise and the experience is what we're looking for. I know I got off on a tangent there, but it's like, man, let's just get back to it. One of the things I'm doing in a resilience experience is focusing on how do you take somebody that is fragile or not resilient and make them better? How do you forge them in fire and make them a better example for others to follow? Resilience now, because of the lack of family units, isn't being taught in the household. So if you get out into the world and you're looking for purpose and to be built in fire by being forged, you might not have the military experience. You might not have the war experience, but we want to fight as a culture, as a society. So the resilience experience is about training people by exposing their vulnerabilities, by letting them know there are tactics they could follow without the war, without the military experience, and become more resilient in both mindset, which is kind of figuratively, and literally that translates into a better, more resilient life. This experience is a 4 or 5 day experience that we're hosting in November here in Evanston, Wyoming, which is about an hour and a half outside of Heber City, Utah. You fly into Salt Lake City. I think that's the closest airport. And then we have professionals like Mr. Peters, who's going to give you the best tactics on building mental and physical resilience, using cold and hot. We're going to have myself and other experts there to walk you through this experience. It's going to make you better. And I think that's going to be the rollout for some of the things that we're going to do for next year that are going to be amazing. I mean, we operate off a government schedule, which is October to October, because we need to like close out the year for January 1. So expect to see some of those things in October, November, December as we begin to roll them out. So how do you survive a gunfight? I know a lot of people talk about gunfighting, and it's like, on one side, it's like, oh, you'll never be in a gunfight. No, why are you calling it gunfight? It's offensive. That's not defensive. Let me be very clear about the term gunfighting. I'm not, nobody's teaching you to conduct a raid, right? Because that's an offensive action. It's a deliberate planning sequence. You have contingencies, like compromise criteria, all these different things that you work up in this collective task of conducting a raid. When we talk about gunfighting, it's self-protection, self-defense. So one of the things I want you to get wrapped around is understanding self-protection and what it means. What does self-defense mean? Well, self-defense is exactly that. It's defending life, not offensively taking life. If you're an operator in special operations, you deliberately are going into a situation like a mission to kill or capture, to potentially take life. But if we're teaching and we're getting wrapped around the understanding of self-defense or protection, it's about preserving your life and the life of your loved ones, even the life of your community. So if you look at self-defense, the tactics are very different. It's the reason when we talk about CQB, it's not offensive actions, especially for civilians. It could be like that for law enforcement, but it's defending the home. Close quarter defense scenarios and tactics are very different than a hostage rescue, than a direct action mission killing bad guys. Because one, I know the space, the layout. Two, I'm in the space and layout. I'm sleeping or I'm on the couch. Three, the way I maneuver in my own space, understanding there's a stranger, potentially a stranger, in that space who doesn't understand the layout, I have a tactical advantage maintaining surreptitious movement or actions. So that would be very different from the concept of principally applying violence, speed, and surprise. So I want to think about self-defense from a principle perspective of preserving life, which means if the criteria is met in my decision point to activate the use of my deadly force to protect myself, I need to understand exactly what that criteria is to make the decision to say I'm doing that. If we train technical expertise, we typically do it by activating a script, a draw from the pistol onto a target by saying beep, go, fire, shoot, threat, whatever the call is. That's audible. But remember, how we perceive things in real time, in real life, is based on our perception. What we've realized in even self-protection classes that we teach at Fieldcraft or abroad throughout the country is that somebody's experience in their life is likely going to dictate their criteria for activating the go. Meaning, if you're a rancher from rural Montana, your go criteria to activate your self-defense tactics and using deadly force might be very different than if you're a guy who lives in a condo in San Francisco, because the laws are different, your carry configuration is different, and your society and culture are different depending on where you live. Also, what's important to note is your background and experience as a person, not just where you live geographically. So if you're a woman, for example, and this is coming from Leah, who taught me this in real time on the podcast, for example, you have a broader social network. I never thought about a woman's ability to bridge a community because of her broader social network. Men like to isolate. We like to have our little echo chambers, our little groups, our little tribes. But women like to communicate and express their ideas throughout. They like to have different means and different networks and different social structures, and they're more open to conversation, to discussion. Men are not like that. From experience personally being a man and from seeing men who have behaved that way, but also behavioral psychologists who tell you the same. So what does that mean? Well, that means a woman who has a maternal instinct, who might react differently because of the way that she's programmed, might default to a different means of executing the tactic. So she might delay, or she might be more aggressive. If I give you a scenario where there's a child, that person's child in the scenario, and say a person is going down the hallway to potentially harm or threaten the child, her maternal instinct might click on and go, I'm going to kill that person. I'm not even going to take the chance. They're in my home, castle doctrine, stand your ground. I'm not going to risk that life. If you're a more trained male, you might hesitate. You might say, well, I'm going to wait until they present a potential deadly threat to me. Then that's when I'll use deadly force. You have to wrap your head around this concept, and that starts with the conversation, as we always say in Fieldcraft Survival. It's like, you want to learn more about yourself and what you will do, then start having the conversation and asking the questions. If you don't have a source solution, start finding and looking for one with smart tacticians who know better. The smart tactician is not the guy who's running around in skinny jeans like an idiot, shooting paper and steel and giving you a reflection of an experience that's not even tethered remotely to combat, to war, to self-protection. Remember, in self-protection, you have to identify. You have to identify who's friendly and who's a potential threat. And so if you create the behavior or script and activate that script haphazardly, you could be putting yourself in a liable circumstance where you're killing innocent people unnecessarily. And you'll have to live with that circumstance for the rest of your life. But if you understand, there's analysis of this situation where I have to perceive a threat by identifying, hey, what are the hands telling me? But more importantly, what is demeanor telling me? Imagine walking into a self-protection scenario where you draw your gun and you see a person with a gun because you shot paper with guns and that's how you operated, and then you just shot everything with a gun. And then the person you shot with a gun, which has happened, there are studies of this, there are examples of this, where the person who was shot with a gun was a law-abiding citizen trying to protect other people, the responsible citizen, and you just gunned them down because you've activated a script where you believed what one person said about this idea. I want you to understand that like everything I'm telling you is not the end-all be-all solution. This isn't a reflection of my experience as a contractor in the military. This is a reflection of teaching this every single weekend and working with subject matter experts, including law enforcement officers who are dealing with this routinely. I mean, many of our instructors, including Matt, including Dave, including I would say all the Fieldcraft Survival instructors that we have brought on in the recent past have given us examples, even in their own situations, in using deadly force where this is relevant and changes constantly. Right? If there's a situation or scenario that unfolds, we're like, oh man, there's something to learn from this, then we're going to talk about it. We're going to mention it. And that's important. One of the things that you should expect in a gunfight that's not often reflected in training is the understanding of stress and how it affects your technical proficiency. Now, we routinely talk about this in gunfighter pistol and carbine and the everyday carry consideration courses and law enforcement training that we do. But it's glossed over in cool reels or videos or even posts. Some of the things that we want to kind of hone you into is the neurological effects that take place in milliseconds that activate performance-based biology, chemistry, that affects your physical body. That's meant for you to survive in a primal and not very technical world. The cortisol and the adrenaline that flood your body aren't really and ideally meant for you to perform technically. All of the fight-flight tactics and a sympathetic nervous response are meant for you to mobilize and activate movement, including physical running or physical fighting. And these don't really cross over into the idea of technical proficiency and how I should operate. So what's often glossed over is, I'll teach you how to be technically proficient, but without the context of understanding or without the culmination and stress shoot of understanding how stress really works, then I'm not fully giving you the picture. I'm not giving you the entire roll-up of what's actually happening. It's why we started self-protection. It's why our instructors are teaching self-protection with scenario-based and stress-based foundations, where now your heart rate's elevated and you're fighting for your life. Most recently, I taught a tactical Tinder. It was just a funny catch on words, but basically a 2-person CQD course where we had people that were couples or just partnered up that had to roll through a scenario together. As soon as they rolled into the scenario where there were active role players that were trying to shoot and harm them, the stress level elevated. So all of the technical proficiency they thought they had comfortably on a flat range were not ideal, and were not perfect in their situations. I had a guy who slide locked his gun, which means he ran out of ammo, and didn't realize he was slide locked as he was doing close quarters defense tactics, moving around single, corner fed room, center fed room, stairways, hallways, and didn't even realize his gun slide locked. It's one of the reasons why self-protection scenarios are so very important at kind of identifying what your true weaknesses are. It's the testament to your technical proficiency. It's the validation for it. So when you do this in training and try to train for self-defense, it benefits you to elevate your heart rate, make things a competition, and try to capitalize on what am I really operating at when elevated stress exists. If my heart rate's 185 and I'm not able to shoot straight, am I very technically proficient? Am I good at operating under stress? If not, then obviously we need more training. But that's ultimately in a stress shoot how I identify your weaknesses and then take those technical weaknesses and isolate them and repeat and recirculate this level of training. You know, there's a lot of industry experts that are convoluting this and then isolating their market saying, this is the end-all be-all solution. This is how it's supposed to be done. And anybody else is dumb. Well, I beg to differ. The reason special operations guys, I think, are the best at their particular job is because of their willingness to learn from different experts. I mean, it's their willingness to kind of open their minds to different experts who might not have the full picture, but they're certainly experts in their specific field. We are that. We have a narrow field of expertise. That doesn't mean you shouldn't work with the not mindset experts. You shouldn't work with the combatives experts. You shouldn't work with whoever to make your overall game and preparedness sound. Something that's very glossed over in surviving a gunfight is what happens post. Let me give you an example of a scenario that I just put some guys through recently where I'm used to seeing this, but I was kind of in shock. We routinely see this. What if I give you a scenario where you kicked in the door to your loved one's room? Maybe it's your bedroom, and it's your wife laying on the bed, or your child in a crib. But you respond in some way, you go into that room, and then you see two male subjects who are both immediate threats to you, And those threats who are immediate threats to you are pointing guns at you, both equal distance apart. And as you open the door, you see them with your pistol that you're carrying in home defense in line with them. What do? I mean, like, literally, what do you do? Like, walk me through that scenario. So a couple responses would be, well, the first person I'm looking at, I would address them as a threat, and I would shoot them until they're no longer a threat. And then I would move on to the next one. Another answer would be, I would move offline, use the threshold, the relative cover from the threshold, the side of the door, to get some type of cover and address the first person I see with 5 rounds, 2 rounds, 3 rounds, depending on the person, and then move on to the next threat. And then another answer that I got this weekend was, I don't know. I've never been in that scenario. I'm not going to make anything up. Respect. I respect that. So let's actually talk about this. Because imagine you're the person in self-defense who reacts or responds, and this is the scenario you're propelled in. But not only are you just technically propelled into it, but you get a surge of adrenaline, a surge of cortisol, and that is your life. Can you imagine that? Like, whoa, that's like, holy crap. Like, wow. What do you do? How do you react? Well, one of the ideas of self-protection training or self-defense training in the first place to survive a gunfight is we obviously want to train it because we want the training to take place on a flat range in a controlled environment, in a safe environment, and not in real life. So let's talk about the first idea, which is I shoot the threat till it's no longer a threat. One of the things I like to do is I just got to do this recently because we had the right format. I took one of the people that was in the class, and we had mats they were standing on. And I said, on the immediate sound of threat, the tuh of threat, I want you to pretend like you've been shot and just fall to the ground. Crumple in place. And when you fall and you're completely stretched out on the ground, I stop the timer. Ready? Threat. Stop. 2 seconds for them to hit the ground. So if you're a hunter, especially big game or even small game, you know that when you hit an animal, especially like big game, elk, a deer, and you hit them with a rifle or even a bow, when you hit them, you're trying to hit a big box. You're not looking for the neurological defeat of that animal. I'm not shooting him in the head. I'm not shooting him in the spine. I'm putting one center mass. And then there's a reaction. It's typically a flinch response. And then most of the time they move. They do a flinch response and they move and jerk into action. I shouldn't say that out loud. So if that takes place and they jerk into action and they move, how long does that take for you to perceive they're no longer a threat? Well, that takes time. In fact, I just demonstrated by him falling on the ground a minimum of 2 seconds. How many seconds does it take you to shoot 6 rounds? I can do it in a little over a second. So how many rounds can I shoot in that period of time? 10 rounds? Let's say you shoot 10 rounds in 2 seconds. That's a lot of rounds and a lot of time. So do I spend the time on the first suspect waiting to perceive if they are no longer a threat or even hit the ground? Because by then, I'm already dead. Because the second guy who's pointing a gun at me in my scenario that I gave you has already identified you as a threat, and their reaction time, 0.2 of a second, they just break a shot. So what is the right answer? I'm not saying necessarily the right answer isn't perceiving that they're no longer a threat, because certainly the situation will dictate that, but I'm giving you a controlled circumstance. I'm telling you the scenario. I had a guy once, he goes, well, I would never put myself in that situation. I said, what if I created this scenario where the guy just puts the gun to your head and pulls the trigger? You're not in control of all the scenarios that you want to control, because a lot of times we're reacting to the scenario as it presents itself. Another thing to think about is when I break a shot off in the gunfight first, I am changing the psychology and behavior in that gunfight. It's one of the reasons I think, and this is my hypothesis, why we have this tactic called suppression. I mean, it's literally a tactic in FM 7-8 on reacting to contact. Like if I react to contact, I don't slew my weapon system and try to identify the threat. If I have the general vicinity, I'm going to, as quickly as possible, get rounds in the vicinity to change the psychology. That psychology could lead to a behavioral change, like the bad guy breaking out of his fighting position and running, like keeping his head down. I had a student once smartly ask, which is justified, why would you want to keep the bad guy's head down? Aren't you putting him behind cover or concealment and potential cover? Yes, but I'm affording my position the opportunity to flank and maneuver. If you have multiple people, I am the base of fire, the support by fire position, and I am flanking and maneuvering somebody else. That is a tactical advantage. If it's me and I am breaking a shot off and I'm getting them to flinch response, where they're flinching down or maybe even moving to cover, that allows me to maneuver, giving me the upper hand. So there is a task and significant purpose behind the justification of breaking that shot off as quick as possible. Likely the first shot you break off will change the psychology. I mean, I've been in gunfights in the house, outside of the house, and whenever we've been in gunfights inside the house, I have seen this before, but I've rarely seen bad guys who are willing to stand and take it, especially when they know good guys are shooting at them. So what is the answer? I don't know. It's for you to script, you to manage, but you to also understand in a real life self-defense scenario, you have to make this in a flinch response time, meaning you're reacting now. That happens fast, guys. And I also want you to understand that once that decision's made, what is the legal recourse? What do you do post-shootout? What happens when you shoot, you perceive threats are no longer a threat or continued to be a threat, and then what happens after the gunfight? So when you survive a gunfight, because you're taking the pistol, aligning it with a threat, you're not using front sights, you'll evolve to your front sights, which I think is good practice, but when you react against a threat, because you're not a Delta Force operator, because you're a mother of 2 children that you love and you're protecting them like Mama Bear would, then you're breaking shots off till you're perceiving they're no longer a threat. Then you have to ask yourself the question, what now? So some of the things, if you're listening to me, I just took a sip of LaCroix. I'm not sponsored by LaCroix, but I've drank too much Black Rifle coffee. Just a note on Black Rifle Coffee, the new Ford Observer, which was previously Coffee or Die, I have a good article coming out on me and everyday carry and all the things that we're doing. Make sure you check that out. If you haven't, I subscribe to that. It's delivered to my door every issue, and it's a really good publication. It's one of the publications that are continuing to do good writing, good reporting. One of my favorite guys on there there's a great team of guys that are doing this, but one of my favorite guys on there is Jericho, who used to be a Ranger Battalion First Sergeant, who's now retired, who's doing real-world reporting, working with Marty, and doing amazing write-ups on all the things that are going on in the world. I think it's a great magazine. Go ahead and check them out. I digress. But getting back to the legal recourse, one of the things that we do in self-protection classes is talk about the legalities. One of the reasons I don't like special operations guys teaching self-defense, no offense, I mean, the tactics certainly, but the totality of the situation, not a chance, is because we don't know the law. I mean, I'm more of a liability in that circumstance because I'm reactive because I have a myriad of tactics that I would use, but don't understand, I forgot there was a whole thing called the criteria for self-defense or the use of force. And, I want to tell you the story about it on site, on scene, but I should probably wait until I have legal representation to communicate about this. In a big boy world, the use of lawyers is very advantageous if you want to be law-abiding. Sure, you can get out there and rage out, and you get on your social media and say, I'm innocent. This is what happened. But in a court of law, that's not how this works, and you could be hurting yourself. One of the best things that I've seen taught is the idea of stating your belief that you were fighting to defend your life because you thought you were going to be killed, or your family was going to be hurt or killed, and stick to the narrative, which is just stating the fact of what you believed, and then anything in detail waiting for your lawyer or your representation to be there with you. Because if you say the wrong thing on site, it can be used against you in a court of law. And that's scary. I know unfortunate circumstances, even with law enforcement officers who are put in situations where they're using self-protection, self-defense, and they are spending their life in prison. Guys, this is not a time to screw around. We live in different times where politics are affecting legal decisions in a court of law. I know you all know this, but please pay very specific attention to that. There are a couple organizations like USASOC or these organizations out there that give you the coverage. Not a bad idea. To have a lawyer on retainer for something as serious as defending your life in a world, especially in centrally center or epicenters to large demographics, including metropolitan areas where crime is running rampant. Look, that is not me just bloating or inflating a situation. That's the statistics. If you Google crime statistics 2022, the highest rate of crime statistics in the world, in our history of this country, is happening right now. So what are you going to do about it when you have to defend life? In this concept of legal representation, you need to understand that you are guilty until proven innocent in a court of law. All right? It's not as easy as like, oh, the sheriff is a good dude, or the law enforcement officers are good dudes, or they didn't seem to have a problem with it. You better have the right legal representation and keep your mouth shut until you could filter that through a lawyer who's going to represent you in this case. And I know a lot of people, including myself, when I heard this, were like, man, I would never do that because I don't want to seem like I'm guilty of something. Well, that's not how the system works, right? There's opinions amongst people. Like the officer might go, well, this is kind of shady. That doesn't count in a court of law when the district attorney who's woke decides to go after you because you're a former military person or because you took a Fieldcraft Survival course, which could be a thing. Like, oh yeah, this guy's a killer. Like, no, he's trying to protect his family and his community. Also, we talk about what are your actions specifically post gunfight. Like, let's say you're the Dickens who goes into Indiana in a mall with your girlfriend, defends life. What happens when you gun down the bad guy and you're sitting there in civilian clothes and you're holding a pistol? Well, you better get on, or you better have somebody get on dispatch through 911 to communicate who you are, what just took place, and then your current posture. There have been a couple examples I've seen in the last year of good guys being killed by good guys because they were misidentified, because the last call dispatch got was there was a guy with a gun. They show up, guy with a gun. How do they react? They introduce the script. They don't assess demeanor. They don't assess whether the person's a potential threat. They just go guy with a gun and they put them down. And that happens to be a good person. So I want to set a posture, maybe put away my gun. If there's no longer a threat and I've assessed there's no longer a threat, I might put the gun away and then break or distance myself from the crisis site in order to communicate to dispatch where I'm no longer perceived as a threat, but there also are no longer any threats in my area of responsibility. That's important to note. Please do that. Please do that. Lastly, let's talk about everyday carry. Carry every damn day, right? One of the things I do is I break down 3 instances of carry. Everyday carry, mobility or vehicle defense, and home defense. This system right here, which is pretty fancy, I got a SIG Mark 18 sitting in this system that allows me to, using biometrics, a thumbprint, remove the holster because I have kids. One of the things that's important in everyday carry is the ability to ready access. That translates to home defense, translates to mobile defense. You want to be able to go to your waistband, go to your European man satchel, go to your holster, your Vera. I think this is the Reach 2S. Because I have kids, I don't like guns sitting around that are loaded, that are readily accessible in the vicinity of my kids. Because my son will come down here, he'll pick this up, and he'll go to pull it out, but it won't come out but I could readily access it. So when you carry, I want you to think about the ability to reach, which is minimizing your time in which you identify a threat and then you react to that threat, and self-protect. That's important to note, because if you are not set up for success, meaning you haven't thought about staging the equipment in the appropriate place, you will just lose the gunfight. So everyday carry, readily accessible in your vehicle, on your person, and most certainly your home. This is my mobile office. I have this system set up here, which you can't see. It's out of shot, or it's out of frame. Sorry, I was doing that like it was in frame. It's out of frame, but I'll show you guys that in content later. But super important. It's staging your equipment for everyday carry the morning of, and remembering how you would feel if you were in a situation where you had to defend your family and you didn't have that tool because you were put in the worst case scenario. I know a lot of people think, well, situational awareness will get me out of this scenario. Yes, but if the worst case scenario is ready to meet you face to face, head to head that day, you have no choice in the matter. And you might have to defend your life. And God forbid that you have to live the rest of your life because you survived knowing that you didn't have the tool to defend life. It's the responsibility of all Second Amendment or constitutional loving Americans to carry every damn day. Guys, that's all I got. I hope you guys enjoy your day, your week. I will say thank you to all the overwhelming support to Fieldcraft Survival and all the things that we have done thus far. We're on a mission. It's mission purpose and driven. All the employees that work for my company are amazing human beings who are trying to do their best in making their impact in the world. And we're doing this together. Without your support, without your overwhelming support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And I appreciate you having my back, especially in these weird times where we've understood that the left and right fringe are going to do what they do, but we need to stick together. AmericanContingency.com is where you can find the local community groups. And I hope you guys have a great week and kick ass. Till next time. Peace out, guys.